Welcome to the Healthy Families New York Program Quality Series. This session is the second in a 6-session series that is designed to help you as Healthy Families New York providers understand and use quality measures to improve the outcomes of your program. Through this series, you will learn where specific data are gathered and why, and you will also learn how tools in the MIS can be used to improve the quality of your program's performance. I'm John Heck.
And I'm Corinne Noble. We'll be your guides through this material. Before beginning this session, you should have already completed the 3-part series on the basic forms training, also gone over session 1 in this current series, and been working in the role of a family support specialist for at least 6 months. This session is intended primarily for FSSs and supervisors. As we mentioned in the previous session, you will be able to view this webinar at your own pace, stop when you want to, replay areas you may want to hear again. The time in which you complete each session is less important than what it is you learn. So don't feel pressure to learn everything quickly. Feel free to replay areas where you need a better understanding over and over again.
Please pause and print out, or ask your supervisor to print out, your program's last quarterly report around performance targets. If you are not clear about how to do this, refer to the instructions found by clicking the link to Healthy Families training videos and then the link to the instruction page. Each performance target report is usually run for a quarter or a 3-month period. This report will be helpful to you as we discuss the various elements of the report and where those numbers come from.
And just to clarify, John, that those links are going to be found on the MIS homepage.
Okay, good. Thank you for that clarification.
Let's talk about what we want to accomplish in session 2. At the end of this session, you, the learner, will be able to identify the HFNY forms and items that are used to measure performance targets, understand what data is valid for use in measurement of the performance targets, and get specific details of the outcomes that are being measured for reporting to your funder, that is OCFS. Okay, let's begin. Our plan for this session is to go over each individual target and give you details on each of the terms we defined in session 1. It's going to be a long one, folks. As we said in the previous session, each performance target is very specific to what we're measuring. Each of the targets identify what the program is trying to achieve. Each performance target has a cohort, a subgroup of your active service population. Usually the cohort is defined by families with a target child of a specific age during the report period. The performance target report calculates, based on the report's time frame, how old the child is at the beginning and end of the report period. This information enables the report to identify the age-appropriate form with the data item that is used to measure the outcome. The age-appropriate form is the most recent form in the MIS, and it provides the most up-to-date information about the family. Let's see an example. For HD4, target child has a medical provider. If the target child is 4 months old on the last day of the period, the age-appropriate form is the target child ID.
And Corinne, not to interrupt, but HD4 will define that as we go along. It's actually the 4th health and development target.
Thank you, John. For the same target, HD4, or the Health Development 4, If the target child is 14 months old at the end of the period, then the age-appropriate form will be the 1-year follow-up. Again, the age-appropriate form is the most recent form in the MIS, and it provides the most up-to-date information about the family. Regarding validity, a case or family is valid if the age-appropriate form is found. That is, you've entered the age-appropriate form in MIS. It is in window. What do we mean by in window? As you know, every form has a due date. Some are due within 30 days of enrollment, for example. Most reoccurring forms have a window of validity between 30 days before or 30 days after the due date. In window would be any day within those 60 days. And the last item to make this valid would be that it has been reviewed by the supervisor. If any of these 3 attributes are false, form is missing, it is out of window, or it has not been reviewed by the supervisor, the family or case is considered invalid, and that case will not be included in the calculation of the target. As you can see, your efforts to enter data in the MIS are crucial. We need good data for each family or case to measure the targets. We will be revisiting this logic as we go through each slide.
Many, many times. So if you didn't get it now, we will repeat this over and over again. Okay, so let's go through the performance targets one at a time so that we are very clear about who and what is measured and how. In HD1, which is Health and Development 1, and you'll notice as we go through, as we said in the last webinar, these codes of each of the performance target are helpful for us to zero in on what we're talking about. So, in HD1, the one on the screen, the target of this performance is 90% of the target child in the cohort, meaning that 90% of the children will meet whatever the criteria is. That means that not all target children in the cohort need to be up to date with immunizations in order for the program to meet the target. The 10% not meeting, meaning what the difference between 100 and 90, may include those that have personal, religious, or medical reasons for not being up to date with shots. These 10% may also include those on creative outreach where their shot history is not known or not up to date. Right after the column stating the measurable target and the time frame for measuring it, the cohort is listed. Remember that the cohort is the subgroup of your active service participants that will be measured for this particular performance target. The cohort to which this performance target applies is determined by the age of the target child during the quarter. You'll also notice that I said active service participants. If a participant has closed during the quarter, we will not include them in these cohorts. The cohort for this target is target children who are 1 to 1.5 years old. Any target child between 1 and 1.5 years at any day, on any day, in the 3-month quarter will be measured for this performance target. Even if they turned 1 on the last day of the reporting period or were 18 months on the first day of the reporting period, we will use this logic. They will be included in the target. We will use this logic again in other performance targets. Important to note, when there is a multiple birth, each child is considered a target child and is part of the cohort. This is true for both immunization targets and the well baby visit targets. Each TC in a multiple birth situation will be looked at separately in achieving the desired outcome. Notice that the only shots that are expected to achieve this target or to be up to date on immunizations by 1 year are 3 DTP shots and 2 polio shots. These shots represent a research proxy for all shots required by the Center for Disease Control, CDC. The dates of these shots must be on or before the target child's first birthday. These 5 shots, according to the CDC, are due when the child is 6 months old. Therefore, there's a 6-month window after the due date for the shots that is acceptable. As you can see on the chart, there are no invalid cases for this target. For HD1, the data come from the target child medical form. In the next webinar, we will show you some shortcuts in analyzing each target child's medical records.
For HD2, immunizations at 2 years, things are very similar to HD1. This performance target looks at a proxy of shots when the target child turns 2 years old. 3 additional shots are expected at age 2, 1 more DPT, 1 more polio, and the first MMR. These additional shots are due at 18 months. So again, there is a 6-month window or cushion for the data to be entered. As stated before, these are not all the shots recommended by the CDC, but a proxy of shots to represent up-to-datedness for immunizations at age 2.
And just a further note here that on your ticklers, you will notice that we don't just tickle you for the shots needed for the performance targets. We are tickling you for all the shots according to the CDC schedule. For HD3 lead assessment, you will notice that the 90% target for assessing for lead in the environment. We are not looking for perfection, so there is a little wiggle room here. This target has to do with asking questions, which we will see on the next slide, on a regular basis about the existence of lead in the target child's environment, where the target child lives. This is not the blood work. The blood work is called lead screening. This information is asked only on the follow-up form. This target determines whether or not there is the potential of lead in the TC's environment, positive for yes, negative for no. The cohort for this target is target children 9 months and older. We have chosen the cohort of 9 months or older to ensure that the first follow-up form has been completed at 6 months. We start to ask these questions at 6 months as the TC will soon be mobile in the home environment. The age-appropriate follow-up form, as we discussed before, is used by the report to determine if the lead assessment has been done. Based on the date range of the report, it determines how old the child is at the end of the report period. Then, based on the data collection form's timeline, it determines what the most recent follow-up form should be entered in the system. This method will provide the most up-to-date information about the lead in the household. An example, so you might understand this a little more, for HD3. Let's say the child is 10 months old at the end of the reporting period. In this case, the report will look at the 6-month follow-up and record the value of TC7, which we'll look at on the next slide. The 1-year follow-up is not yet due. Another example is, let's say the target child is 27 months old at the end of the reporting period. In this case, the most current data collection point would be the 2-year follow-up. What you see on this slide are the questions that constitute the lead assessment. Item TC7, shown on the screen, on the follow-up form represent the outcome of that assessment. These questions and further explanations about each of them can be found on the paper forms in the Download Forms link in the MIS. If you have any questions about the living environment of the target child, if any of the questions about the living environment of the target child are answered yes, the assessment is positive. And here's the question down here. If this is the case, you should work with the family to help them understand the importance of protecting the target child from lead exposure and have them notify the child's medical provider.
In HD4, medical provider for target children, this performance target is asking if the target child has a medical provider, namely a doctor or clinic where the child is known, has a medical history, and is regularly seen. You will notice the 90% target again, but this time the cohort is target children 30 days and older. Information related to the TC having a medical provider is asked on the target child identification and birth outcomes, the TCID, target child ID form, and on the follow-up forms. Once again, the age-appropriate form will be expected to tell us the most up-to-date information about this target. We start looking at this target when the child is at least 30 days old, as we want to give you time to enter the TCID form in the MIS after the child is born or shortly after enrollment if enrolled postnatally. On the TCID form, item 18, as shown on the screen, and item TC4, also shown in the follow-up form, these two are used to determine whether the target is met or not. This target is unique because you can update the status of the TC medical provider in between due dates of the follow-up forms. This is done on the case homepage on the medical provider tab. The report will look for the age-appropriate form, but we'll also look at the case homepage to see if there's more than one current update than the last follow-up form. You will notice that the TC will not meet the target if you say no or leave the item blank. When there is multiple births, because we ask you to do only one follow-up form, we are going to assume that if one of the multiples has a doctor, the other one has one too. A case is invalid when the target child ID and birth outcomes form is missing, or the age-appropriate follow-up is missing, out of window, or not reviewed by the supervisor.
HD5. This has to do with well baby visits. According to the New York State Department of Health, a child should have 7 well baby visits by the time they turn 15 months old. This performance target is achieved by the family if the child has 5 well baby visits by 18 months. Again, we are looking for 90% of the target children in the cohort meeting the target. You will notice that the definition of well baby visits is on the screen over here. This definition is also found on the paper form. Important to remember, when the family enrolls postnatally, efforts should be made by the program to request the target child's history of well baby visits from the TC's medical provider. Also, this has to do with immunization, so both of those should be requested so that you could accurately measure the first 2 targets we talked about. The enrolled case tickler will give you an idea about the number of visits required as of the month of the tickler report. As you'll notice, there are no invalid cases.
HD6 is similar to HD5. The cohort is target children between 27 and 33 months. This target will only look at the time frame between 15 and 27 months and expect to find 2 well baby visits, even when the New York State Department of Health guidelines recommends 3 well baby visits between 27 and 33 months.
HD7. This target is different from the previous ones, as 98% of the children need to meet the target, as opposed to 90 as we have seen so far. The cohort is target children 4 months and older, as the 4-month ASQ is the first developmental screen required by healthy families. The HFA best practice standard requires 2 within the first year. There are 3 aspects to meeting the target for HD7. First, the report will look for the age-appropriate ASQ, that is, completed and in the window between 30 days before and 30 days after the due date. All 5 domains have under cutoff scores, and it has been reviewed by the supervisor if the online review is turned on. If this is the case, the child meets the target. Second, so this is the second aspect of this performance target where they can meet the target. And this is where the age-appropriate ASQ is completed and in window, reviewed by supervisor, and in this case, 1 or more of the domains is under cutoff, and item 15 on the form, was target child referred, is marked yes. Then the child meets the target. Obviously, in this case, you will also want to put a service referral in. Finally, if the age-appropriate ASQ is missing and the last ASQ in the system has 16A, as target child started receiving developmental services, is marked yes, then the child meets the target. In this case, first of all, if you'll see at the bottom of the screen, we put what the required ASQs are. And also, if in this third case, when the child is receiving developmental screens, your tickler will tickle you to stay in touch with the EIP service to get updates. But we will not expect any ASQs in the system because the EIP service will be doing those developmental screens. The only way a valid case will not meet the target is when there is at least 1 under cutoff score and a referral is not made. Item 15 is marked no. There are other, besides the required ones at the bottom of the screen, obviously if you're familiar with ASQ, there are many other optional ASQs at 2 months, 6 months, 9 months, 10 months, etc. Optional screens may be completed if a required screen was not able to be completed or the program feels they want to check in with a target child's development. These optional screens will then help the child meet the target if the optional one is the last age-appropriate ASQ for the quarter. Namely, if you miss one or you want to do an extra one, you can get back on track by doing these optional ones. Each child in a multiple birth situation is considered a target child. Therefore, each child will have their own ASQ record. If the TC is born premature, and our definition is 36 weeks or below, the due date to complete the age-appropriate ASQ is delayed by the number of weeks short of 40 that the child was born. This adjustment happens on all ASQs up to but not including 24 months. When there is an under cutoff score, item 15, was referral made, needs to be marked yes, and a service referral form also needs to be completed. If a target child starts to receive EIP services, the program is not required to do ASQs, as I mentioned before, but will be tickled to check with EIP for updates when an ASQ is due for the child receiving the services. The ticklers also let you know in the premature situation when the adjusted due dates are. Whew, that's a lot. You might want to run that one back again. There's a lot to know in that one. Okay, moving on to 8.
Well, this is the last one of the health and development ones. And it is similar to HD4, except that now the target is looking to see if the PC1 has a medical provider. This is, again, a provider who knows PC1, has medical records for her, and is seen regularly by this provider. You will notice the 90% target again, but this time the cohort is primary caretakers that have been enrolled for at least 30 days. Once again, the age-appropriate form will be expected to tell us the most up-to-date information about this target. If the age-appropriate follow-up is valid, but the PC1 is not living in the household, the case will not be counted in the cohort. We started looking at this target when the family has been enrolled for at least 30 days. If the child has not turned 6 months old in this quarter, the intake form will be looked at for the medical provider. The cohort waits for the case to be enrolled for 30 days as we want to give you time to enter the intake form after enrollment. If the TC is older than 6 months, the age-appropriate follow-up will be used to tell us whether or not PC1 has a medical provider. So, if the target child is under 8 months old,
Is 8 months old.
if the target child is 8 months old, it will look at the 6-month follow-up. But if the child is 13 months old, it will look at the 12-month follow-up. This target is unique as HD4 because you can also update the status of the PC1's medical provider in between due dates of follow-up forms. This is done again on the case homepage on the medical provider tab. The report will look for the age-appropriate form, but will also look at the case homepage to see if there's a more current entry than the last follow-up form. The only way a valid case does not meet the target is when on the intake form item 15, and you can see it on the screen, if item 15 is blank or no was answered, or on the follow-up form if item PC18 is blank or no, as you can also see on the screen. The definition of invalid is very similar to what we've already discussed. A case is invalid when the intake form is missing or the age-appropriate follow-up is missing, out of window, or not reviewed by the supervisor.
Karine, I just can't remember what an invalid case is. Could you say that again? No, I'm only kidding. Don't say it again. Okay.
We're probably going to repeat this over and over.
So we have completed the health and development targets, and you might either pause this for a while, take a breath, walk around, and come back, and we will launch into the PCI targets, which is the parent-child interaction targets. But for those that are willing to keep going, let's keep going. So PCI1, the first parent-child interaction target, is measuring whether or not 30% of the primary caretakers, ones, in the program have breastfed for at least 3 months. The MIS report will look at both the 6-month and the 1-year follow-up. Again, you can refer to the paper form, and it describes the definition of breast milk, and what it essentially says is that if the child has any breast milk in their diet, it doesn't have to be exclusive, it will count. To meet the target, item TC1, which is over here, it has to be yes, and then TC2, which tells us how long, has to be either 4, 5, or 6, which is 3 months up to 6 months, or 6 months up to 1 year, or 1 year or greater. Certainly on the 6-month follow-up, you can't answer 1 year or greater.
Yes.
The cohort is families with target children between 6 and 15 months. This group will ensure that either the 6-month follow-up or the 1-year follow-up, or both, have been completed with the most up-to-date information about breastfeeding.
PCI2, valid PSI assessment. PCI2 is one of the two targets that measures the behavior of the program and workers, not of the participants. It is important to monitor the completion of the first Parent Stress Index for each PCI, for each PC1 that is expected in our data collection system. The first PSI is administered or due either within 30 days of the target child's birth if enrolling prenatally, and that is called the birth PSI, or within 30 days of intake if enrolling postnatally, called the intake PSI. This initial PSI determines the cohorts for the next 4 PCI targets. You only administer the PSI when you have a target child. When there is a multiple birth, you should ask the participant to pick one of her target children and think of that child when answering the questions. When future PSIs are due, have the PC1 remember the child they picked for this first one and have them continue to think of that child as they do the subsequent PSI intervals. The cohort for this target is families with the initial PSI due in the first 2 months of the quarterly report period or in the last month of the previous quarter. Your tickler will help determine when this form is due. To meet the target, you simply need to administer the PSI in the window and have the supervisor submit and approve the form. You need to be careful about leaving items blank. As this is completed by PC1, you should check to see if there's no more than one missing or blank item in each section. If you have more than one in any section, the whole form is invalid.
So before we talk about the next 4 PCI targets related to the PSI, the Parenting Stress Index, let's talk about the PSI. So looking at this chart, you will notice there are 4 different categories or scores to consider. There's the PD, there's the PCDI. PD is parental stress, PCDI is parent-child dysfunctional interaction, and there are bigger letters there because I'll mention that in a minute. There's DC, difficult child, and there's total score, and you'll see each one has a range, and then each one has an 85th percentile. And they are used, these sub-scores are used in different targets. So the range of scores in each domain that includes high stress. All right, let me say that again. There is a range of scores in each domain that indicates high stress. This occurs when your participant scores higher than the 85th percentile of all these other people that have taken this assessment, i.e. the 85th percentile. In the case of the participant score on the PCDI domain, 26 or higher indicates high stress at the time they took the assessment. For total score, here, a score of 86 or higher indicates high stress. Therefore, the purpose of the PSI is to measure parental stress of the PC1 at multiple points in time. You'll notice at the bottom of the screen, this is what it would look like on the MIS if the scores for this is above, this one. This one is above 26 and this one's above 86. The goal of these PCI targets is to identify highly stressed PC1s at the beginning of service and work toward reducing that stress over the course of the first year in the program. The higher the stress, the higher the potential for child abuse. The lower the stress, the lower the potential for child abuse. To piggyback on the PCI2 performance target, we want to establish a baseline of parental stress by collecting that initial PSI, the one at intake or right after birth. At the beginning of service, if enrolling prenatally, hey, I'm going to say that right now, if enrolling prenatally or right after the TC is born in cases where the participant enrolls prenatally. We will be targeting only two aspects of this assessment, the PCDI, as I said, and total score. PCDI, as the parent-child interaction, is the focus of our intervention, so that seems a legitimate thing to measure.
So the next four PCI targets will follow participants that have high stress on their initial parental stress index until the target child turns 1 year old. That is, participants who scored above the 85th percentile at the birth PSI. After the initial PSI, the parenting stress screen is administered at various intervals based on the target child's age, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4, 5, and a discharge. So the cohort for PCI 3, which is the one that you have now on the screen, is participants that score above the 85th percentile on their initial PSI for total score. That is, a total score of 86 or above. The target will be met for each participant in the cohort if the total score of the 6 months PSI falls below the 85th percentile or below a score of 86. For the program, 60% of the cases in the cohort need to meet the target. If met, you have provided services to this participant that have reduced their stress level, thus reducing their potential for abuse. If the score remains above the 85th percentile or above a score of 86, the target will not be met and will be measured again when the TC is a year old. Only cases in the cohort with valid 6 months PSIs will be considered. So cases with 6 months PSIs that are missing, out of window, not reviewed by the supervisor, or have too many missing items will be excluded from the performance target measurement. Out of window, as I mentioned before, means that the PSI was administered more than 30 days before the due date or more than 30 days after the due date.
I think they're getting it, don't you think?
I think we're repeating it over and over. We're going to keep on it.
Yeah, we're going to keep on this. Okay, so PCI 4 is following up on what Corrine just mentioned in terms of the total score. And we're watching the, what is this one now? Still the total score, and we're looking, we watched the 6 month PSI for those in the cohort before, and now for PCI 4, the target will be met for each participant in the cohort if the total score on the 1 year PSI falls below the 85th percentile or below a score of 86. Again, the target percentage for the program is higher than the PCI 3. For this target, 80% of the cases in the cohort need to meet the target. If the score remains above the 85th percentile or above a score of 85, the target will not be met. Again, repeating what we said about the last one, only cases in the cohort with a valid 1 year PSI will be considered, and the same rules apply about being invalid or not being considered for this target. Missing, out of the window, not reviewed, and too many missing items.
Okay, so now we go to PSI 5, which is reducing parental child dysfunctional interaction stress, the PCDI that John mentioned a couple of slides behind, in highly stressed families when the child is 6 months old. So the cohort is participants that score above the 85th percentile or a score of 26 and above on their initial PSI on the subdomain parent-child dysfunctional interaction. This subdomain is chosen, as John said, as a target because it measures the relationship between mother and child, and this is the focus of the Healthy Families intervention. This PSI target will also follow the participant in the cohort until the child turns 1 year old. PCI 5 will be met for each participant in the cohort if the PCDI score on the 6 month PSI falls below the 85th percentile or below a score of 26. For the program, 65% of the cases in the cohort need to meet the target. Those cases meeting show that the services provided to the family have worked to reduce their stress level, thus reducing their potential for abuse. If the score remains above the 85th percentile or above a score of 25,
Yep.
the target will not be met, indicating that more work needs to be done. Only cases in the cohort with valid 6 month PSIs will be considered. Cases whose 6 month PSIs are missing, out of window, not reviewed, or have too many missing items, as we have repeated over and over again, will be excluded from the performance target measurement.
Okay, so one more of these.
Yeah, one more.
One more of the PCI targets, and that's 6, and it's piggybacking on what Corrine just said about the parent-child dysfunctional interaction, except now we're going to be looking at the 1 year PSI. So for PCI 6, the target will be met for each participant in the cohort if the PCDI score on the 1 year PSI falls below to the 85th percentile or below a score of 26. The percentage is a little higher for the program than PCI 5, and now we're looking for 80% of these families that were in the cohort to fall below this target, this 85th percentile. And obviously, if the score on the 1 year PCDI score is above the 85th percentile or above 25, the target is not met. And once again, we'll sing our song about invalid, that we'll only consider valid ones, and if it's missing, out of the window, not reviewed by supervisor, has too many missing items, it will be considered invalid. So that concludes our parent-child interaction targets, and now we will move on to the family life course targets.
Okay, so these are 7 performance targets called the Family Life Course, and they deal with improving the life course of the family. They target several members of the family, PC1, OBP, or PC2. Let's look at FLC1, which is Employment, Education, and Training at the target child's first birthday. Of all the families with a target child between 12 and 18 months in the quarterly reporting period, it looks for half or 50% working or in an employment or educational program on the 1 year follow-up. Because it looks at families where the target child is 12 to 18 months old, the 1 year follow-up should have been completed. If PC1 or OBP or a PC2, if there is one, are in the home at the time of the follow-up, they will be considered for this target. But if PC1, PC2, and OBP are all not in the home at the 1-year follow-up, the case or family will be excluded from the cohort. If the report finds a yes for any of these players on the 1-year follow-up, either on the item, did PC1 or PC2 or OBP hold a job since the last follow-up, you see it up there on the screen, or the item, has PC1 or PC2 or OBP been involved in an educational or employment program since the last follow-up, the target is met. Like in previous targets, the case would be invalid or excluded from the program performance.
Oh, how will that happen?
Well, if it's missing, out of the window, or not reviewed by the supervisor. Notice that if the form was valid, but you left these items blank, the case would be considered to not meet the target.
Okay, FLC2 is identical to FLC1, except now we are looking to see what is happening in the family at the target child's second birthday. For FLC2, we look to see if 75% instead of the 50% in FLC2, of all the families with a target child between 24 and 30 months, the cohort, in the quarterly reporting period are working or in an employment and education program on the 2-year follow-up. You'll notice that because we are only looking at families where the target child is 24 to 30 months, the 2-year follow-up should have been completed according to the data collection timeline. This gives us, again, the most up-to-date information about the family. And as we said on the other one, if PC1 or OBP or PC2 are in the home at the time of the follow-up, they'll be considered for the target. However, if all 3 of them are not in the home, obviously they will be excluded from the cohort, and nothing will be calculated for this target. And again, all we need to see is that the item where it says whether they have a job or not is yes for any one of those 3 players if they're in the home, or if for any one of those 3 players, if they're in the home, they're in an educational and training program. And I will save you the repetition of telling you what an invalid case is so we can move on to the next performance target, because you need to stay awake here.
Okay, so FLC3, that is TANF on the first birthday, the report will look to see if PC1 was receiving TANF benefits on the intake form, and then check when the target child is 1 year old to see if they have stopped receiving these benefits. The cohort is again based on the age of the target child, and in this case, it is the target children between 1 and 2 years old in the quarterly reporting period, and PC1 was receiving TANF benefits at intake. What this means is that the data collection timeline is the intake has been completed, and the 1-year follow-up should have been completed also, so that we can calculate this target. To meet the target, the intake form item FAM6 is answered yes, and you can see it up there on the screen. And the 1-year follow-up item Family 7 TANF shown on the screen also is either received since last follow-up but not currently receiving, or no receipt since last follow-up. Also, if item Family 6 on the 1-year follow-up is no. Because there are many factors outside of your realm as a home visitor, your program is only asked for a 35% of families in the cohort need to meet the target. Am I going to say this again?
Yes.
To have a valid information. The intake has to have been entered. The 1-year follow-up is not missing. It is in window and has been reviewed by the supervisor.
Okay. So we're getting there. FLC 4, again, identical pretty much to FLC 3, except now we're looking at a second point in time, and that being when the child is 2 years old. All the same rules apply that we talked about before. The cohort is now, we're target children between 2 and 3, which ensures that the 2-year follow-up is in the system, and that the intake is complete. Again, to meet the target, you either are saying on the follow-up form that the family does not have any benefits at all, or that they have stopped receiving TANF or have not received it since the last follow-up. It's FAM 6 on the 2-year follow-up that says no. That's the one that says, does the family receive any benefits? And all the same rules apply for the invalidity or the validity. So let's move on. The next two targets, FLC 5 and FLC 6, the general aim is to identify PC1s at intake who are less than 21 years old and do not have a high school degree or diploma or GED. The idea being that we want to get these moms back into school because being under 21, they're still eligible for public school. So the report will look at this cohort when the target child is 6 months old and at the TC's 1-year birthday. The performance target will expect PC to be in school or have a high school equivalent degree. For the cohort or families or cases for FLC 5, let's see, what are we saying here? The cohort for FLC 5 would have the characteristics just described, under 21 in intake and no degree or equivalent, and have the target child between 6 months and 1 year. To meet the target, the report will look at the 6-month follow-up and need to find one of two pieces of information. Either, do we have a picture of this here? We don't, do we?
We have it on the next, in the next slide.
Okay. So why don't we just go to that slide so we can look at it. So to meet the target on the 6-month follow-up needs to look like this, meaning that they're involved in a PC 1-6. It says that they're in an educational and training program, but look that there's only 3 that will work, because these 3, 1, 2, and 3, are the ones that indicate they're working toward a degree. Or if during that period of time, when they didn't have the degree and now they have the degree, you answer the highest grade as high school grad, GED, vocational program, or some college, etc. For the program, let's see, can we go back? Yes, we can. For the program, to achieve the target, 85% of the PC1s in the cohort have to meet the target. Is that correct? Mm-hmm. And again, all the same conditions apply for the validity. Okay, you can see we're getting kind of tired here too.
Yeah, you don't want to repeat it again?
Okay.
Okay.
So now we'll go to FLC 6.
Yeah, which is education of participants under 21 at intake at the target child's first birthday. So the cohort here target children 12 to 18 months old, where the PC1 was under 21 at intake and did not have a high school degree or a GED. This performance target is similar to FLC 5, except now it would look at when the TC is 1 year old. To meet the target for FLC 6, the report will look at the 12-month follow-up and needs to find the same kind of information as we saw in FLC 5. Either PC1, highest grade is high school grad, GED, vocational school after high school, some college, etc., or PC16 is involved in an educational or employment and training program is answered yes, and then you identify which the program is, either middle school, high school, GED, college. For the program to achieve this target, 90% of the PC1s in the cohort have to meet the target. And again, to have valid information to be included, the intake has to be entered, the 6-month follow-up is not missing in the window, and reviewed by the supervisor. If any of these conditions are not true, guess what? The case is invalid. This is what it would look like.
Just very similar to FLC 5.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, we're hitting the last performance target on the quarterly performance target report. I'm doing this one. Yes, I am. And this is looking at the parent survey to see if there are challenging issues identified. For this target, we are defining challenging issues on the parent survey as alcohol and substance abuse, depression, other mental illness, disability, and domestic violence. There may be other challenging issues in this family, such as developmental disability, but for the purpose of this target, we will be tracking the ones mentioned above. In the next slide, we will give you a visual of what meets the target, but for now, the target is essentially this. The cohort are those PC1s that have one or more of the challenging issues identified on the parent survey. Is it the presenting issues?
Current issues.
Yeah, current issues, okay. To meet the target for FLC 7, the performance target will need to find a specific service referral for that participant to address the issue or issues within 6 months of enrollment. If the participant does not enroll after the parent survey, they will not be included in this cohort. So let's take a look at what that looks like on your forms and in the data system. If the PC1 identifies a current issue on the parent survey for either, so you'll notice that 74 is primary caretaker 1's current issue, and that's on the parent survey. If they say yes for alcohol or substance abuse, or both, then the referral that needs to be in the system is 52 substance abuse services, and that needs to be dated within 6 months of enrollment. Not 6 months of the parent survey, but 6 months of intake. If depression or other mental illness and disability is identified on the parent survey, meaning it's going on while the survey is happening, then if they enroll within 6 months, either one of these two service referrals, 49 or 50, need to be dated within 6 months of enrollment. And finally, domestic violence is identified on the parent survey, then 51 domestic violence services as a referral needs to be in the system. Now, a point to make here is that if the participant is receiving any of these services already, as an example, if they're already receiving, say, mental health counseling, then even though they're still receiving it at the time of intake, you will enter a referral for the specific service code, but you will say, no, they didn't receive the service, and mark it as the reason why, as they're already receiving the service. Okay. So that concludes all of the, how many are there?
21.
21 performance targets, and it's probably more than ever you wanted to know, but please use this as a reference as you go through and print these reports.
It is our hope that, after concluding this session, you are better able to identify the HFNY forms and items that are used to measure performance targets. You have a better understanding of valid data and what is invalid, and how it is used to measure the performance targets, and have some more detail on the outcomes that are being measured and used in reporting. In the next session, we will be showing you how to run the quarter report and the accompanying QA reports for you as a home visitor, to use these QA reports to identify possible corrections and missing forms needed on the performance target report, to drill down to specific cases to problem solve issues, and get a chance of how to read your own quarterly performance target report for quality and positive reinforcement. Thank you so much.
You're done with session 2. Again, the third one, as Corrine said, will give you a little practical experience running the quarterly report, the quarterly performance target report. Remember, we're always here to help you, and should you have questions or need some help, you can call our helpline number, which is on the screen there, 518-591-8610, or submit a ticket through the home page of the MIS. Now, on to session 3.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.